In Kumasi, Ghana, there lived a young woman named Efua whose heart was full of dreams bigger than the streets she walked every day. While others spent their time gossiping at the market, she sat in quiet corners with borrowed books about Paris, New York, and Nairobi. She imagined herself walking through airports, speaking different languages, and sharing the rich culture of Ghana with the world. But whenever she spoke about her dreams at home, she was met with harsh words instead of encouragement. One evening, as the family sat for supper, her father slammed his hand on the table. "Stop dreaming, Efua," he shouted, his voice echoing through the small room. "Girls like you belong in the market, not in airports. You will waste your life chasing shadows." Her mother shook her head, muttering about how foolish Efua was. The words pierced her like knives, and tears stung her eyes. She wanted to scream to defend her dreams, but all she could do was remain silent. Deep inside, though, her heart whispered softly, "Don't give up. One day they will see." That night, Efua lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling of her room. She held her old notebook filled with scribbles of places she longed to visit. She pressed it to her chest like a secret treasure, a promise only she could understand. The world outside told her she was nothing, but inside she carried a fire that refused to die. Even in her pain, she knew her story was just beginning. The smell of jollof rice and grilled tilapia filled the air as Efua's extended family gathered around the long wooden table. Laughter echoed through the compound, children ran about, and everyone was in high spirits. Efua sat quietly, her heart racing. She had been keeping her dream hidden for so long, but tonight she felt brave enough to share it. Maybe, just maybe, someone would understand her. When her uncle asked the usual question, "So, Efua, what are you planning for your future?" she took a deep breath. With a small smile, she said, "I want to apply for a scholarship abroad. I dream of studying in another country and becoming a cultural ambassador for Ghana." The room fell silent for a second. Then, suddenly, her mother burst into bitter laughter. Her aunt quickly joined in, shaking her head. "This girl thinks she is special," her mother said loudly, making sure everyone heard. "Efua, stop fooling yourself. You will end up selling tomatoes in the market like the rest of us women." The relatives roared with laughter, clapping their hands as if she had told a joke. One cousin leaned across the table and whispered with a smirk, "Look, it's the dreamer of Kumasi. Maybe one day she'll fly with her imagination since she can't afford a real ticket." Another aunt added, "Instead of wasting time with books, she should learn how to cook better. That will help her find a husband." Every word was like fire burning through her chest. She sat frozen, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to let fall. She forced a smile, but inside she was breaking apart. The food on her plate suddenly tasted like dust. The same people who were supposed to lift her up were tearing her down in front of everyone. She looked at her father, hoping for a little support, but he just shook his head in silence, his face cold and hard. To him, her dreams were nothing but childish nonsense. That silence hurt more than the laughter. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, Efua pushed back her chair. The legs scraped loudly against the floor, silencing the laughter for a moment. She stood tall, though her heart was trembling. Without a word, she walked away from the table. The mocking voices followed her as she left the compound, but she did not turn back. Outside, under the dim glow of the streetlight, Efua finally let her tears fall. Her hands were clenched into fists, her chest rising and falling with anger. She whispered to herself, "One day they will eat their words. One day I will prove them wrong." At that moment, the humiliation began to turn into something else. Fuel. The voices that mocked her became the voices that pushed her. Efua knew the road ahead would be hard, but she also knew this. No laughter, no insult, and no humiliation could kill the fire of her dream. Instead, it only made her determination stronger. The days in Kumasi grew heavier for Efua, but her spirit refused to bow. After that humiliating dinner, she knew she could no longer wait for anyone's approval. If her family would not support her, she would find her own way. Quietly, without telling anyone, she began planning a secret life. Every morning she acted like the obedient daughter who sold vegetables at the market, but when night fell, she became something else. Someone fighting for her dream. In the evenings, she slipped into crowded buses that rattled all the way to Accra. There she worked as a tutor for neighborhood children, teaching them basic English and math. The pay was small, just a few cedis, but to Efua, every coin felt like a piece of freedom. Some nights, after tutoring, she stayed up even later sewing torn clothes for neighbors. Her fingers would ache, her eyes heavy with sleep, but she stitched with determination, whispering to herself, "This is not forever. This is just the beginning." She saved every little bit she earned in an old worn-out shoebox under her bed. Whenever she opened it, the sight of the growing money gave her strength. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Her parents never knew. To them, she was still the silly dreamer wasting her time. Efua carried her secret like a burning candle, protecting its flame against the wind. Late at night, after everyone was asleep, she would spread her notebooks across the floor and begin studying. Her small lamp flickered, casting shadows on the cracked walls. She researched visa requirements, scholarship deadlines, and cultural exchange programs, even though she barely had internet access. Sometimes she copied entire pages of information by hand, afraid the data would disappear before she could read it all. Her eyes would blur, her stomach would rumble with hunger, but she pushed through the fatigue. "If I don't fight for myself," she whispered, "no one will." There were moments when loneliness crushed her. She watched her friends laughing freely, living ordinary lives, while she carried the weight of an impossible dream. Some nights she cried silently into her pillow, wondering if her parents were right. Maybe she was just a foolish girl chasing shadows. But then she would remember the laughter at the family dinner, the mocking voices calling her the dreamer. That memory lit a fire in her chest. She would not let their words define her. Her shoebox of savings grew heavier, her knowledge sharper, her determination stronger. Each sleepless night, each painful stitch, each coin tucked away was proof that she was building her future with her own hands. Efua was still tired, still hungry, still lonely, but inside her burned a truth no one could take away. Her dream was alive, and she was ready to fight for it, no matter how long it took. The day Efua sent in her first scholarship application, her hands trembled with excitement. She had spent weeks filling out every form, gathering her documents, and writing an essay about her dream to represent Ghana abroad. When she finally clicked the submit button, her heart raced. For the first time, her dream didn't feel like just a fantasy. It felt like it was within reach. Every night after that, she prayed, imagining the moment she would hold her acceptance letter in her hands. Weeks passed slowly. Each time the postman passed their street, Efua's heart leapt. Then one evening, after a long day at the market, she found an envelope waiting for her. She tore it open with shaking fingers, eyes scanning the words quickly. Her chest tightened. Her hands dropped to her sides. The letter was short but sharp. "We regret to inform you that you have not been selected." The world seemed to blur around her. For a moment she couldn't breathe. This was her first real chance, and it was gone. She walked back into the house, trying to keep her face calm, but her father noticed the paper in her hand. He snatched it, skimmed it, and let out a cruel laugh. "Didn't I tell you?" he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Dreaming is useless. Look at you, wasting time, wasting money. Girls like you don't fly on planes. Stop embarrassing yourself." Her mother shook her head and muttered, "Now maybe you'll finally listen." Her cousins, overhearing, whispered to each other with smirks. The word dreamer floated again in the air, sharp as a blade. Efua wanted to run, to hide, to scream. She held back her tears until she reached her room. There, behind the thin wooden door, she let them fall freely. The rejection crushed her, but what hurt more were her father's words. They pressed on her heart like heavy stones. For hours, she lay curled on her bed, staring at the letter that seemed to mock her every hope. But as the night stretched on, her tears slowly dried. She sat up, wiping her swollen eyes, and stared at the shoebox full of her savings. She touched the notebooks filled with research. She remembered every late night she stayed awake studying, every stitch she sewed for money, every moment she sacrificed while others laughed. Could she throw it all away because of one letter? "No," she whispered to herself, her voice breaking but firm. "I will not stop here. I will not let them win." That rejection, instead of killing her dream, began to feed it. It lit a new fire inside her, fiercer than before. Efua promised herself that one day, she would walk into an airport, not as a foolish dreamer, but as a woman who fought through every no until she found her yes. The letter lay on the floor beside her, no longer a sign of failure but a reminder of the path she had chosen. Rejection would not define her. Her determination would. The sun was blazing over Accra as Efua hurried through the busy streets, her bag heavy with books and her hands sore from the sewing she had done the night before. She was tired, but her mind was sharp. Every corner of the city felt alive with movement, vendors calling out, children weaving between cars, and tourists snapping photos. Efua often walked through these streets quietly, unnoticed, carrying her dreams in silence. But on this day, something unexpected was about to happen. She saw a family of tourists standing at a crossroads, looking lost. The mother held a map upside down, the children fidgeted restlessly, and the father scratched his head in confusion. Most passers-by ignored them, but Efua stopped. "Hello," she said politely, her voice calm and clear. "Do you need help?" The father looked at her with relief. "Yes, please. We're trying to find the National Museum, but we seem to be going in circles." Efua smiled warmly and began explaining, not just the directions but also the history of the museum. She spoke about Ghana's independence, its rich traditions, and the cultural treasures they would find inside. Her English flowed smoothly, her words filled with passion. The children, who had been bored, suddenly leaned in to listen. The mother's face lit up with admiration, and the father, tall, gray-haired with sharp but kind eyes, watched her with growing interest. "You speak beautifully," he said when she finished. "And you know so much about your country. Are you a tour guide?" Efua blushed slightly and shook her head. "No, sir. I just love reading and learning. I dream of becoming a cultural ambassador one day." The man's eyes softened. He introduced himself as Professor David from Cape Town, South Africa. "You remind me of my best students," he said thoughtfully. "Have you ever considered applying for a cultural exchange program? My university has one." Efua's heart skipped a beat. She had spent so many nights imagining an opportunity like this, and now here it was, falling into her hands in the middle of a busy street. I don't have much support," she admitted shyly. "My family thinks it's foolish." Professor David gave her a firm but encouraging smile. "Support or not, a mind like yours should not go to waste. Why? I will send you the details myself." For a moment, Efua could hardly speak. Her throat tightened. Her eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. She thanked him over and over, her voice trembling with gratitude. As she walked home that evening, the city lights glowing around her, Efua felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. This wasn't just a dream written in her notebook. It was real, living, breathing. For the first time, she felt the universe whispering back, "Keep going, Efua. This could be your chance." That night, she opened her shoebox of savings, touched her worn-out notebooks, and whispered to herself, "The door is opening. I just have to be brave enough to walk through." The morning of her embassy appointment felt like the most important day of Efua's life. She woke before sunrise, her heart pounding so hard it echoed in her ears. On the wooden chair by her bed sat her worn-out handbag, holding her documents: birth certificate, letters, application papers, everything she had worked for these past years. She picked it up with trembling hands, whispering a prayer under her breath. When she told her parents she was leaving, they didn't wish her luck. Her mother scoffed, her father sneered. "Why waste your time? You will only embarrass yourself." Their words hit her like cold water, but Efua swallowed the pain. She couldn't let them see her break, so she tied her scarf tightly, lifted her chin, and stepped out alone. The bus ride to the embassy felt endless. Every bump in the road seemed to shake her nerves. She looked out of the window, watching the city pass by, and wondered if this would be the day her dream finally took its first breath, or the day it was buried forever. She clutched her handbag to her chest as though it were a shield, whispering to herself, "Be strong, Efua. You've come too far to give up now." The embassy gates were tall and intimidating, guarded by men in uniforms. The waiting hall buzzed with voices in different accents. Efua sat among strangers, her palms sweating, her throat dry. She read over her papers again and again, afraid she had forgotten something. Finally her name was called. She stood on shaky legs and walked into the interview room. A stern officer sat behind a glass window, his eyes sharp, his voice clipped. "Why do you want to travel? Who will support you? How will we know you will return?" Each question felt like a test, each word making her heart race faster. But Efua answered with honesty and courage. She spoke of her dream to share Ghana's culture with the world, of her years of tutoring and sewing to save money, of her determination to study and return as someone who could bring honor to her community. Her voice trembled at times, but her conviction did not. The officer typed something into his computer, silent for what felt like hours. Efua's chest tightened, her knees weak. She thought of her father's laughter, her mother's doubts, the cruel nickname, Dreamer. She braced herself for another rejection. Then, without looking up, the officer stamped her passport. The sound of the stamp was like thunder in her ears. "Your visa is approved," he said flatly. Efua's eyes widened. For a moment she couldn't breathe. She clutched her passport with shaking hands, staring at the fresh ink on the page. A travel visa, her very first, was finally in her grasp. She walked out of the embassy into the sunlight, tears streaming down her cheeks. She wasn't crying from pain this time, but from victory. She whispered to herself, her voice breaking with joy. This is the beginning. The day Efua had dreamed of since she was a little girl finally arrived. Kotoka International Airport in Accra buzzed with life, announcements echoing, suitcases rolling across the floor, and travelers hurrying in every direction. In the middle of the busy crowd stood Efua, holding her small, worn-out suitcase. She wore the same handbag that had carried her documents through sleepless nights, and in her hands was her passport, stamped with the visa she had fought so hard to win. For the first time, her tears were not from pain but from joy. She had survived the humiliation, the rejection, the loneliness, and now here she was, ready to step onto a plane for the first time in her life. She stood straighter than she ever had, her chin lifted, her eyes glowing. Neighbors who had once mocked her as the foolish dreamer now surrounded her, smiling and cheering. Some clapped her on the back, others waved small flags, and a few even apologized quietly for doubting her. Children ran around her shouting, "Efua is flying! Efua is flying!" Their laughter filled her with warmth, but deep inside, she knew that not everyone was happy. Her parents had refused to come. Her father sat at home, silent and stubborn, unable to accept that the daughter he had called useless was leaving as a victor. Her mother hid her shame behind anger, pretending not to care. That absence hurt, but it did not stop Efua. She had learned that some victories are too big for everyone to celebrate. As the boarding call echoed through the speakers, Efua hugged the few friends and neighbors who had come. An old woman pressed her hands into Efua's and said, "Child, fly high. Show them that nothing is impossible." Those words settled in her heart like a blessing. Walking through the security gates, Efua glanced back one last time. The crowd waved wildly, their faces full of pride and awe. She smiled through her tears, lifting her hand in goodbye. Her steps were shaky but filled with courage. Every stride felt like a piece of her old life falling away, and every breath carried her closer to the future she had always dreamed of. On the plane, she sat by the window, her hands gripping the armrest tightly as the engines roared. Her heart raced, and for a moment, fear tried to creep in. But then she remembered the nights she had sewn until her fingers bled, the rejection letters, the laughter at family dinners, and the cruel words of her father. All of it had brought her here. As the plane lifted off the ground, Accra growing smaller beneath her, Efua pressed her forehead against the window. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they sparkled with hope. In a trembling whisper meant only for herself, she said, "This is just the beginning." When Efua stepped out of the airport in Cape Town, her heart almost stopped. The air felt different, fresh, cool, carrying the scent of the sea. Towering buildings stretched toward the sky, the mountains stood proudly in the distance, and the streets buzzed with people from all walks of life. For a moment she just stood there, clutching her suitcase, her eyes wide with wonder. She whispered to herself, "So this is the world I dreamed about." The first few weeks were overwhelming but magical. Every street corner offered something new. A street performer playing music, art on the walls, languages flowing together like a river. Unlike back home, nobody mocked her for dreaming. Here, people encouraged her curiosity. She walked into lecture halls filled with students from different countries. And for the first time in her life, she felt she belonged. Efua studied harder than ever. Late nights at her desk no longer felt like punishment, they felt like purpose. She absorbed everything her professors taught, raising her hand with confidence, asking questions boldly. Soon, people began to notice her brilliance. Professors praised her essays and her deep knowledge of Ghanaian history and traditions. Her classmates admired the way she carried herself with quiet strength. But Efua didn't just study. She shared. At cultural nights, she wore traditional Kent cloth and taught others how to dance to Ghanaian rhythms. She cooked jollof rice for her classmates, making them laugh as she argued passionately about why Ghana's jollof was better than Nigeria's. The pride she once kept hidden now shone openly, and people loved her for it. One professor, after hearing her presentation on African identity and unity, told her, "Efua, you are not just a student, you are a voice the world needs to hear." His words lit a new fire in her chest. Invitations began to pour in. First, she was asked to present at a local conference. Standing on the stage, facing hundreds of people, she spoke with passion about the importance of preserving African culture in a modern world. The audience applauded, some even standing to cheer. That single moment was like a door opening. Soon, she was invited to other universities, other cities, and even other countries. Her dream, once small and fragile, was now spreading its wings wider than she had ever imagined. At night, when she returned to her small dorm room, she often sat by the window looking out at the lights of Cape Town. She thought of her father's harsh words, her mother's laughter, the shoebox of savings hidden under her bed back home. She thought of the girl who once cried in silence, mocked for being a dreamer. And now here she was, not just living her dream but expanding it. Efua whispered into the night, her heart swelling with gratitude. "This is bigger than me. This is just the beginning of something I was born to do." 2 years passed faster than Efua could believe. Cape Town had changed her life. Conferences, cultural programs, recognition from professors and students alike. But nothing compared to the moment she booked a flight back home. This time, she wasn't coming as the girl mocked for dreaming too big. She was returning as a recognized cultural ambassador of Ghana, her name spoken with respect in places she had only read about before. When the plane touched down at Kotoka International Airport, her hands trembled. She pressed her face to the window, her heart racing as she saw the familiar land beneath her. Memories came rushing back, her father's laughter when she was rejected, her mother's scolding at the family dinner, neighbors calling her the foolish dreamer. Now she was stepping back not as the same girl who had left but as a woman transformed. The doors of the airport opened, and Efua was stunned by what she saw. Cameras flashed wildly as journalists shouted her name. Crowds filled the hall, holding banners that read, "Welcome home, Efua," and "Our pride, our daughter." Children waved small Ghanaian flags, singing songs as if they were welcoming a queen. The very neighbors who once mocked her now pushed forward, eager to shake her hand, their faces shining with pride. Some mothers whispered to their daughters, "Look at her, one day you can be like Efua." For the first time, the title dreamer was no longer an insult. It was a badge of honor. Through the sea of people, Efua spotted her parents. They were not smiling, not cheering, but standing stiffly at the back of the crowd. Her father's eyes avoided hers, his lips pressed tight, as if he could not believe what he was seeing. Her mother clutched her cloth, blinking rapidly, her pride and shame wrestling silently on her face. They said nothing, but their silence was louder than words. Efua didn't hate them. In that moment she only felt peace. She had no need for their approval anymore because the world had already given her something greater: respect. A reporter pushed a microphone toward her and asked, "Efua, how does it feel to come home like this?" She smiled, her eyes glistening. "It feels like a dream, but not the kind you wake up from. This is proof that no matter how small your beginnings, if you keep believing, one day the world will believe with you." The crowd erupted in cheers. People clapped, shouted her name, and waved their hands in celebration. Efua lifted her chin and walked forward, not as the girl who once left in tears, but as the woman who returned with honor. That night, as she looked around at the village where she had been mocked, she realized something powerful. She hadn't just proven her parents wrong. She had given every young girl who dared to dream a reason to believe that they could rise too. The grand hall in Accra was filled with people from different countries. Leaders, professors, students, and journalists. Cameras flashed, microphones lined the stage, and the audience waited in silence. When Efua stepped up to the podium, dressed in elegant Kent cloth, the room erupted with applause. She stood tall, her voice steady, her eyes bright with purpose. She began softly. "There was a time when they told me to stop dreaming. They laughed at me, mocked me, and even called me foolish. But dreams," she paused, her voice rising with passion, "are like seeds. If you water them with hard work, with patience, and with faith, they grow into forests that no one can cut down." The crowd leaned forward, hanging on her every word. Some nodded with tears in their eyes. Others clapped as her words struck deep in their hearts. Efua spoke about her journey, the sleepless nights sewing and tutoring, the rejection that almost broke her, the visa that changed her life, and the courage it took to keep moving when no one believed in her. In the front row sat her parents. Her father, once so harsh, now wiped his eyes with trembling hands. Her mother wept openly, covering her face with her scarf. They had tried to silence her once, but now they were listening with the rest of the world, proud, ashamed, and humbled all at once. When she ended with the words, "Never let anyone tell you your dream is too big," the hall exploded with thunderous applause. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Efua smiled, her heart full. She had not just spoken for herself, she had spoken for millions of dreamers everywhere. Her voice had become their voice.